Chapter 6 begins by talking about how the brain has evolved in the context of evolution. It says in the book that the brain size of primates, especially those in humans, has increased in the context of evolution, and that an enlarged brain is equivalent to increased capacity for higher cognitive abilities. However, it is hard to say which extended region brought us which additional abilities. Scientists compare certain species to one another to reveal principles of nervous system organization. This helps us to see how particular brain features affect particular behaviors. So, naturalists are the people who raise doubts to the idea that each species was created separately. They saw that the limb bones of all animals were similar in many ways, despite their way of life. Evolution then sprung from this notion. Evolution is when a population of interbreeding individuals changes over long periods of time. It is also sometimes called the process of descent with modification. Evolution by natural selection is then the theory that evolution proceeds by differential succession and reproduction. Darwin and Wallace each came up with this idea at the same time. However, Darwin had legit research on the matter, making his work the more prominent. Evolution by natural selection is the most important organizing principle in the life sciences. This concept then went on to demonstrate that animals are not static, as was once thought, as species continually change across generations, gradually gaining some features while losing others. Darwin's theory was based on 4 principles and 1 assumption. The principles were that reproduction will rapidly increase a population unless factors limit it. Individuals in any given species are not identical. Some of the variation among individuals is inherited, and not all offspring of a given generation survive to reproduce. His inference was that variations among individuals affect the probability of them surviving long enough to reproduce, thereby passing on their characteristics to their offspring. Adaptations are then traits that increase the probability that an individual will have offspring. This type of offspring will eventually dominate the population and substantially change the species. Individuals better suited to their environment will enjoy greater reproductive success, meaning that their descendants will make up a majority of successive generations. Sexual selection is then when members of one sex favor specific heritable traits in the other sex when choosing a partner. The example the book gives is the choosiness on the part of peahens, which has led to greater ornamental tails of peacocks. Adaptation to similar ecological factors may bring about similarities in behavior or structure among individuals that are distantly related. This is known as convergent evolution. Homoplasy is a concept of convergent evolution, which says that physical resemblance between physical or behavioral characteristics are due to convergent evolution. Homology, on the other hand, focuses on physical resemblance between species based on a common ancestry. Analogy is then the similarity of function, although the structures of interest may look very different. This is seen in how a human hand is anatomically similar to an elephant trunk, the function of it is very similar, although it is very anatomically different. Gregor Mendel provided the answers that was missing from Darwin's theory. Dave Rees then linked Mendel's work to Darwin. Mendel proposed that we inherit our traits through genetics, and that individual variation was due to mutation or a change in the nucleotide sequence of a gene. Unfavorable mutations hamper reproduction, while adaptive ones are favored and spread throughout the population. However, it's very important to keep in mind that physical traits and behavior evolve in a species over time. This leads to the basic principle that evolution has no goal or endpoint. It is a continual remodeling of organisms in response to environment, driven by differences in reproductive success. Chromosomes, or condensed strands of DNA, contain our genes. Our genes encode the information for constructing a particular protein. Epigenetics, on the other hand, focuses on how an individual's environment and experiences can modify the expression of certain genes in a way that can be transmitted to offspring without changing the structure of the gene itself. Knowing all this, Carolus Linnaeus proposed the basic classification system we use to classify animals today, as we want to explore how related two species actually are. He came up with two things. The genus, or a group of species that resemble each other due to shared inheritance, is the first name in the classification system. A species, or the groups of individuals that can readily interbreed to produce fertile offspring, are the second name in the classification system. So humans are called Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus, while sapiens is the species. Phylogeny then concurs from this, showing the evolutionary history of a particular group of organisms. It allows us to infer about the evolution of behavior, and it is often represented as a family tree. This then takes us over to taxonomy, which is the classification of organisms. Taxonomy makes use of our understanding of genetics to reconstruct phylogeny. The tree starts at the bottom with the most broad classification of all species and works its way up to the most narrow, which is the species that we are looking at. It includes fewer species that are more closely related as you work your way to the top. A mnemonic device to remember the bottom to top classification is kindly put clothes on for goodness sake. This stands for kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. However, it is hard to always go off a family tree because it constantly changes as we get new information. Fossils and DNA are not always the best for measuring common ancestry because fossils tend to be too recent, but molecular DNA dates tend to be too old. An ecological niche is the different animals have evolved different behaviors and means to exploit specific types of environmental opportunities. It is important for us to study other species because evolution is a multi-branching set of radiations, and we use comparisons of different species to gather clues about the history of evolution. This notion of comparing species shows how each species exploits their ecological niches. Species with different biological histories show different solutions for survival and reproduction, and then the pressure to adapt can lead to changes in brain structure, which again can only be seen by studying different species. Box 6.1 on the top of page 169 highlights other important reasons why we should study particular species. And that sums up everything. Thanks, guys.